This is my presentation outline. I'm going to talk about seven topics, which is number one, I'm going to talk about the introduction to the conceptualization of research framework. Second, we are going to discuss on the importance of the research framework. The third one, we are going to talk about the features of good research framework. And then we will differentiate between conceptual framework versus theoretical framework. What is the difference between these two? And then number five, we are going to discuss about what are the variables typically in these research. We will talk about the key constructs, relationship between the constructs, and also the context of conceptual framework and theoretical framework. Number six, how are we going to develop a valid and real conceptualization of research framework? And lastly, I'm going to give you a number of examples regarding the research framework so that you can use this as the reference. Yeah. Okay, let's begin with the conceptualization versus research framework. I know that many of you are confused. Some of you have a mixture understanding with respect to conceptualization as well as research framework. What is the difference between these two? Okay. Now, let's begin with the conceptualization. I'm sure that some of you are very familiar with the term of conceptualization. What does it mean? All right. Basically, conceptualization is the action or process of forming a concept of idea of something in your mind. Meaning to say, before you embark on your study in preparing the proposal, for instance, you basically have some sort of idea what your research is all about. You already identify what are the concept that you wanted to test in your research. So when you are having this kind of rough idea, this is what we call it as conceptualization. Many of us, before we embark on our research, I'm sure some of you have the preliminary idea what you're going to do. All right. So when you have this preliminary idea what you're going to do, you have managed to identify what is your variables and whatnot. This is what we call it as conceptualization. Everything in your head. You just have the concept in mind, but you need to translate them in the form of writing or of research proposal. Yeah. So another definition of conceptualization is an abstract idea or concept of something. When we talk about abstract idea, meaning to say it's not been tested yet. Or maybe in the context of your research, this is something new. No one has done it, or very few people has done it. All right. So therefore, you wanted to test whether your idea is actually feasible to be conducted or not. So that is what we call it conceptualization. It's not been tested yet. Yeah? So that's very important for you to understand. And lastly is conceptualization, meaning the process of writing out clearly and concisely the key concepts or ideas in a practical way that makes sense to you and others for the purposes of research. All right. So the key words here is idea that makes sense to you and idea that makes sense to others, meaning to say a panel of evaluator or a committee that evaluate your research. So when you are having this make sense idea, right? So you're able to convince people that, okay, you have something and then this is the concept that you may test using all the research tools. So basically that is the conceptualization. So I'm giving you a very brief and direct to the point of the definitions of conceptualization. And this is taken from the Oxford Dictionary. Yeah? And on the other hand, all right, so some of you also may be very familiar with the term of research framework. So what does it mean with research framework? All right. Research framework is an established guide of work that control the review of literature and the empirical studies. All right, so we have to understand there are so many problems around us. There are so many so-called phenomenon around us, but you only interested to research on certain phenomena. You only wanted to know why certain phenomena occur, and you wanted to know what is the real problem, and you wanted to know how can I solve the problem. So when you already identify what is the problems that you wanted to solve, therefore you identify in what area that you wanted to position yourself. All right. So like I said, there are so many problems around us, but why in particular you are interested in that particular area? All right. So when you are focusing on that particular area, then you started doing the literature review. You read, you synthesize, you analyze, you evaluate the area of study based on the phenomena that you already identify. Yeah. So research framework here, all right, is where all the literature review that you start collect, that you start review, that you start evaluate is based on the concept that you wanted to test. So basically it is very, very specific. And in order for you to convince a group of people, for example, like a committee, a Viva committee or research proposal committee, that your idea is actually feasible to be conducted. Yeah. So therefore you do the literature review, and you limit your literature review only focusing on the concept or the factors that you wanted to study. Okay. So the next one, a research framework illustrates the structure of the research plan and helps the researcher formulate relevant research questions. So the beauty about having a clear research framework is whereby when you're already clear about what you wanted to do, then it's easy for you to formulate your research question, because you believe that the concepts or the factors that you have identified somehow have a significant relationship or somehow have a significant impacts on the phenomena that you wanted to study. For example, like you really wanted to know what makes people leave their employment. So what happened when people leave their job? So you wanted to know what are the factors that contributes towards that decision. All right. So when you already identify what are the possible factors, or in this case, what are the possible concepts, that easy for you to formulate your research question. Yeah. And then this framework consists of the key concepts of the research work and the assumed relationship between these concepts. When you manage to identify the variable of your study or the concept or the factors of your study, then easy for you to understand what are the possible relationships that might occur between this factor and this factor, or between this concept and this concept. All right. The only thing that you need to be sure now is to test whether there is a significant relationship, or whether there is an effect of these factors toward another factors. Yeah. So this research framework is actually helping you to come up with a clear framework that this is only the factors that you wanted to study. Other than that, you may not interested to study. This is very important for you to identify your research framework. Yeah. So having said just now, what are the difference between conceptualization as well as research framework? All right. So now there is a big question that many of us wanted to know. Research framework, is it referring to the theoretical framework, or is it referring to conceptual framework? Right? So some people, they said that, sorry?
Doctor, yeah? Sorry to interrupt. Could you please make the PowerPoint full screen?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Evident, right?
Okay. Thank you. Right.
Okay. Can you see now clearly, yeah?
Yes, Doctor. Thank you.
Okay. So some of you said that research is about theoretical framework, and the other school of thought say that research is about conceptual framework. So what is this theoretical framework, or what is this conceptual framework? So in my study, right, when I did my PhD, I don't use this term of theoretical framework or conceptual framework, but I use the term as research framework, because that's what I have been taught when I attended this research methodology class in Nottingham. All right. So anybody would like to answer this exercise? Anybody would like to answer this exercise? Whether research framework refers to theoretical framework or whether research framework referring to conceptual framework. Anybody would like to try?
Participants, would you like to try? If you would like, don't want to open your mic, you can write in the chat box. We can actually read it for you.
Yeah, please. I would like to have some feedback, please.
Okay, anyone would like to try? Okay.
Anybody would like to try whether research framework is actually talking about theoretical framework or whether research framework is actually conceptual framework? Which one? I'm sure that some of you have your own unique school of thought, right? Anybody would like to try?
So we have in the chat box saying that NL Dani saying that it is conceptual framework. Aiza Masri also said that it is conceptual framework.
Okay. So two participants said that research framework is actually conceptual framework, isn't it? All right, but basically, all right, let's take a look at the next slide. What is actually research framework? Yeah? So Green in 2014 argues that it could be theoretical framework or research framework also could be the conceptual framework depending on the scholar's own perspective or views. Both terms were used interchangeably. All right. If you got confused, should I use theoretical framework or should I use conceptual framework? Now, I'm sharing with you several scholars that argue on this. Yeah. So I repeat again, Green in 2014 said that it depends on the researcher whether to use a theoretical framework or whether to use conceptual framework. But he further noted that both terms were used interchangeably. Okay. So the next one, according to Parahu in 2006, theoretical framework should be used, according to him, should be used when research is underpinned by one single theory. And conceptual framework, on the other hand, draws on concept from various theories, not only one theory, but various theories, and research findings to guide a research project. All right. So when we talk about research framework, according to Parahu, you should name it as theoretical framework if your study is based on one single theory, right? Or according to Parahu, right, research framework can be conceptual framework if your research is based on several theories, right? What about the argument by Grant and Asonlo in 2014? So they argued that theoretical frameworks are sometimes referred to as a conceptual framework. And however, these terms are neither interchangeably nor synonymous. They can be vague and lead to confusions. All right. So Grant and Asonlo said that some of the researchers, sometimes they use theoretical framework, sometimes they use conceptual framework, and none of this actually interchangeable or synonymous. All right. And then the last one, according to Fain in 2004, Fain suggests that where a framework is based on concept, right, the framework should be called as conceptual framework. And where it is based on theories, it should be called a theoretical framework. All right. So, taking into account this argument from various scholars, I myself, after, when I did my PhD, after thorough discuss with my supervisors and whatnot, all right, so I decided to use the term research framework for my study, and the same, how to say that, the same idea also I convey to my student, and my student use the term research framework. Yeah, and when I presented papers in overseas and Malaysia also, I clearly explained to them why I use the term research framework, and no further question asked regarding this. So, ladies and gentlemen, who are the participants of this webinar, all right. it is up to you whether to use the term theoretical framework or to use the term conceptual framework. Yeah. Now, let's take a look at the importance of research framework. Why research framework is very important. Number one, research framework helps to describe as the map for a study, which gives a rationale for the development of research questions or hypotheses. So one of the great functions of research framework is it helps us to do some kind of mapping with respect to the development of your research question. So when you have identified what is your research framework, then easy for you to develop or for you to formulate your research question as well as your research objective. Right? So the second one, research framework help to assist the researcher to ensure that their research work has coherence and help focuses their mind on what the research is trying to achieve. So when you have a clear research framework, so it tells you what are the areas or what are the concepts to be focused, all right? I understand that for those who are doing master by research or even PhD, all right, the more you read, the more confused you are. You know, when you read this, you say, this is also very interesting. When you read that, this is also very interesting, all right? And end up, you keep on reading until you lost in your reading, all right? So by having research framework, is actually help you to get out from that situation, all right, in which research framework helps you to to make sure that you are coherent and also help you to focus on what are the areas that you wanted to focus. All right. So when you have this research framework, chances are you are guided clearly by the concept or by the factors that you wanted to research. All right. So I still remember when I did my PhD, the first 2-3 months when I read, I get more confused because everything seems interesting. Everything seems important. All right. When I discussed with my supervisor said, "Okay, show me your research framework." I was like, you mean my conceptual framework? Yes, show me your conceptual framework. So when we discuss, okay, Fadila, I know what you are trying to do. All right. Now you need to identify what are the factors that lead towards these factors. You have to be very, very focused and make sure that you are not trying to solve the world problem. All right. You have to be very, very practical. You are doing PhD and you are only have 3 to 4 years, and make sure that within these 3 to 4 years, you should be able to finish your study. Therefore, limit your factors. All right. So based on that discussion, then I managed to polish my research framework. You know? And then the next importance of research framework is it indicates the scoping of the study. Meaning to say, by looking at the research framework, then it clearly tells you and it clearly tells your readers that, okay, this is the area that you wanted to study, and this is other factors that you focus. All right. So very important for you to have a very clear research framework. You know, for those who are doing master by research and PhD, I'm sure that you're going to go through this proposal defense stage, and later you need to go through this candidature defense, and last but not least, viva. So you have to make sure that your research framework is very clear, and all the research framework, you have the research question that follows. Yeah. Okay, so this is the exercise, but I'm going to skip the exercise because I think I'm going to focus on the next slide, when and where to discuss the research framework. All right. Typically in social science research, including management, including business, the research framework is discussed and developed in chapter 2 along with extensive review of literature. All right. So what I'm trying to say here is usually your research framework is developed after you have conducted a extensive review of literature. You have read a lot, you have discussed a lot, you have synthesized a lot and analyzed a lot. Then you are confidently says that this is the research framework for your study. Right? And this process is very daunting process. I do understand because I have gone through the same process like you are doing now. Yeah, doing literature review is quite tough, and then you can easily get lost, all right, because there are too many things that you wanted to cover. But all right, research framework is actually help you, right, to identify and to do the scoping. What are the area that you wanted to focus? All right. So the researcher can opt for either theoretical framework, all right, if your LR is based on theory and later confirmed by data. All right. So you wanted to test the theory basically, yeah. And then second one, you can opt for conceptual framework if your LR is based on concept and terms derived from various scholars and later tested by data. So if you're using conceptual framework, you read, for example, like you wanted to know on what are the factors that lead tourists to, for example, like me and my student, we did a research on medical tourism. So we wanted to know what makes, tourists come over to Malaysia. All right, and we started to gather all the information, all right, and we find out there are so many factors, all right, and how can we actually select which factors to be covered, all right, and the process is whereby I ask my student to do metadata analysis. Identify what are the factors and later find the top factors based on the frequency. So all my students actually having this metadata analysis in their chapter 2. Yeah. So this metadata analysis actually combine all the relevant articles that they read, all right, in the form of table, right, that simplify all these articles in various column, right? I'm sure that in your faculty, your supervisor have ways on how to actually refine the conceptual framework. Yeah. And the third one, the option whether theoretical framework or conceptual framework is best decided by the researcher and should be able to explain clearly in the thesis argument or write-up and justify appropriately during proposal defense, candidature defense, and viva. All right, like I said just now, all right, whether to use a theoretical framework or whether to use conceptual framework, it is based on your decision. Yeah. So you should know why you are using theoretical framework, and you should know also why you are using conceptual framework. But if you decided that to use the term research framework, nothing wrong with that. It's just that you need to clearly justify in your study. Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at the typical contents of research chapter. So what I'm sharing with you is the contents of the research chapter in the social science sphere. All right. So I believe that in other discipline, other areas, the contents of the research chapter might be different. All right. But since my faculty and your faculty are basically more or less the same, so I believe that these are the typical contents of the research chapter that every student need to go through. All right. So basically, in a research chapter, you're gonna have 5 main chapters. Yeah, and these 5 main chapter is supported by the preliminary section in which you should have this title of research, the cover page, the author declaration, the acknowledgement part, the extract, table of content, and all list of the tables, figures, diagrams, appendices, and abbreviation. This is, I think, standard. All right. And then chapter 1, all right, basically these are the contents that you should have in your research chapter. The preamble. Preamble is equal to introduction, but you don't use introduction in introduction chapter. Yeah. So the term is preamble. This is in accordance to IPSIS rule, I believe. And then followed by research background, problem statement, research question, research objective, the scope of the study, significance of the study, operational definitions of key terms, and also organization of chapters. All right. And after you have done your chapter 1, you move to your chapter 2. These are some of the contents that you normally cover in your chapter 2. This is whereby your proposed conceptual or research framework is appeared in your chapter 2 before you summarize your chapter 2, right? So what are the area that you cover? Basically, you're going to have the introduction, the overview of your research area, the explanation about your DV, all right, and also hypothesis, the explanation about your independent variables and the hypothesis, explanation about moderating variables if you have any moderating variables, the explanation about IIV, or they call it mediating variables if you have moderating variables. And after you have explained all the variables of your study, then you find the related theories and model to explain how the relationship, whether the possible relationship exists between all the variables and your DV. All right, and all these possible relationship that you explain, all right, should be appeared in your research conceptual and research framework. All right. So basically, these are the typical contents in chapter 2. All right, in chapter 3, these are some of the typical contents. I believe, I have examined nearly 20-25 theses, all right, PhD and master. So my observation is these are some of the typical contents of this chapter 3, and also typical contents of chapter 4. All right, these are what you report in your chapter 4. All right, and then chapter 5, this is whereby you discuss your findings, your recommendation and conclusion. This chapter 5 is very, very important because this chapter 5 is the chapter that indicate whether you have the breakthrough in your study or not. All right, because at the end of the day, we as the examiner, all right, besides chapter 1 and also the conceptual framework, as well as the results and whatnot, we are looking directly, we are looking this thoroughly, all right, because we wanted to know to what extent their study by the student, all right, is actually contributes to the body of knowledge, and to what extent the study is very significant. So this is some of the typical contents that all of you need to observe. Yeah, and then once you have done chapter 5, you have this closing section in which you have to have the list of references. Make sure that the list of references are the same appeared in your thesis and vice versa. All right. When I examine thesis, sometimes I find out that the list of reference are not available in the thesis, and some of the in-text citation, you quoted someone's work, but it does not also appear references. So many students get caught on this. All right. So dear students, before you submit your thesis, make sure that you check thoroughly your list of references. And lastly, you put all the appendices. Yeah. All right. Do we need a coffee break, Mr. Taufi, or